New information about the church shooting in Texas and the gunman who did it. We're also going to take a look at how some other counties have dealt with gun violence, even though their problems aren't nearly as bad as ours. Election day, it is tomorrow. We're going to talk about the top races in our area and debate whether or not Donald Trump's long shadow could impact them. And I'll make my picks and endorsements. Then both of the former President Bushes, they unload on Donald Trump. We're going to tell you what they said and also share some other shocking revelations from a new book set to come out. Evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you very much for joining us this Monday evening. Well, it's happened again. Just 5 weeks after the deadliest mass shooting in American history, word of yet another massacre at the end of a gun. This time during the Sunday services at a church in Texas. 26 people, they're dead in a town of just 400 people. To get to the very latest, let's go to our senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman.
And Rich, officials now believe a domestic dispute may have set off the gunman. A gunman who, because of previous crimes, should not have been eligible to possess a weapon, even in Texas. But for the people of Sutherland Springs, Texas, this is just a day to mourn and ask why.
We've had a long night with our children and grandbabies we have left.
Just one day after losing his 14-year-old daughter in the worst mass shooting in Texas history, Pastor Pomeroy and his wife are encouraging others to seek comfort in each other.
We laughed together, we cried together, and we worshiped together. Now most of our church family is gone, and the few of us that are left behind lost tragically yesterday.
Frank Pomeroy is the pastor at First Baptist Church of Sutherland Springs. His daughter Annabelle Renee Pomeroy was inside the church when 26-year-old gunman Devin Kelly opened fire.
We have 6 ambulances en route.
The shooter was able to fire off multiple rounds from his automatic weapon, killing at least 26, many children, some as young as 18 months.
There was 3 firearms that had been recovered.
Authorities now believe the attack was fueled by a domestic dispute.
The suspect's mother-in-law attended this church. We know that he had made threatening texts.
Kelly had previously served a year in prison following a court-martial for assault on his spouse and her 11-month-old child. He received a bad conduct discharge from the Air Force in 2014. The nature of the charge should have prevented him from obtaining a weapon, and authorities confirm Kelly did not have a license to carry. For the past 6 weeks, Kelly had been working as the manager at an RV park nearby. He left work on Saturday with a headache and never showed up on Sunday. Authorities believe he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Authorities now say they have video taken from inside the church when the shooting began, and they are reviewing it. Among the images they will see that more than half of all the people who attended that service yesterday were either shot or killed. Meanwhile, President Trump, who's in Japan, reacted to the massacre at a press conference early this morning.
This isn't a guns situation. I mean, we could go into it, but it's a little bit soon to go into it. But fortunately, somebody else had a gun that was shooting in the opposite direction. Otherwise, it would have been as bad as it was. It would have been much worse. But this is a mental health problem at the highest level.
But in the wake of that response, we shift to politics as the president's disparate responses to the other attacks in the U.S. and around the world has some wondering if there's a double standard at play, particularly when guns are the weapon and the attacker is a white man. Take last week's terror attack in Manhattan, weapon a pickup truck, attacker a Muslim from Uzbekistan. The president responded by pushing for policy changes, specifically to his immigrant vetting program, and demanding an end to the diversity visa lottery program, and also by attacking Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer and other Democrats as well. Compare that to the Las Vegas shooter, attacker white male, weapon assault weapon. The president's reaction? Condolences and sympathies. No calls for policy reviews, as his supporters claimed it was too soon to politicize the tragedy. Flashback now to the attack in Barcelona in August. Attacker, a Muslim born in Morocco, raised in Spain. His weapon, a van. President Trump's reaction, condemning the attack and repeating a widely discredited story about American General John Pershing, who the story claims either buried the bodies of Muslim insurgents with pigs or dipped their bodies in pig's blood, a move so offensive that Muslims say it stopped other attacks. It's a claim, by the way, that's gotten a pants on fire status from PolitiFact as they have checked that response. September, a bombing in the London subway station. The attackers there, Muslim, including one from Syria. The responses from the president, calling the attackers losers, sick and demented, and a focus on policy, his proposed travel ban. And then in August, there was Charlottesville, Virginia. Attacker, a white male attending a white supremacist rally. The weapon, a car. The response from the president, nothing on policy, just this.
You had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
And so the questions, Rich, both about what happened in Texas and about the responses to it and to other incidents continue.
You know, I think it's a country we've debated forever, it seems, but the role of guns, etc. But I don't remember the picking sides on who the assailant was, who the victims were, how it would be treated. This is, sadly, I think, a new chapter, even in the wake of these horrible incidents, that is kind of new once again, where, you know, depending on what happens, depending who the assailant is, as you just articulated, there'll be one response from the White House. One channel will say one thing versus something else. What is terrorism? What isn't terrorism anymore? I think it's pretty shameful.
It certainly seems to depend on what the political benefit of focusing on the identity of the attacker seems to be. If it jives with a policy that this administration was already advocating for, then the administration doesn't seem to have any problem advocating for that policy in the wake of a tragedy. When it runs contradictory to that policy or a policy that they support, they tend to hold back. Most mass gunmen in our country happen to be white men, so the demographic may be linked because of the nature of the crime, but it certainly does seem to be a direct link between the policies.
And I wonder if, God forbid, if we saw what happened down in Chelsea, if that van was driven by a white guy, if we would have had any conversations, it would have been too soon and we needed to have time for mourning, or God forbid he used a gun to kill all those people. There
have been a lot of people who pointed out other attacks that have been, not with a gun, or have been, bombings or things like that have been conducted by white men. There was I think there was somebody who was planning to blow up an airport in a southern state not too long ago. It was a white man. That was a homemade bomb that he was looking at using. Didn't get a lot of attention. Again, white man. So that's the kind of coincidence that I think has some people asking even more questions.
Andrew, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so what I want to do now is let's dispense with the normal post-tragedy shock and outrage. I was about to go on some screed about the uniquely American epidemic of gun violence when I realized the Groundhog Day aspect of it all. I went back. I have written more than a half a dozen editorials in just the past 20 months on pretty much the same subject. You switch the date line, you replace the location, you change the names. It's all too familiar. We don't get to be shocked anymore. I want you to think about this number. Nearly 40,000 Americans are expected to die at the end of a gun just this calendar year. As a nation, we average more than one mass shooting every day. We've had mass shootings at grammar schools, at colleges, at movie theaters, at clubs, at malls, and now at churches, and just about wherever else you can think of. Now, let's also dispense with the idea, as Andrew just showed, that somehow our president will show even a pale impression of what amounts to leadership. The hypocrisy and the political selectiveness of when and which tragedies deserve natural discussion, it disqualifies Trump yet again. So, should we just shelve the momentary grief here and move on? Maybe you say we should, and maybe I'm just naive, but I still believe America is better than that, and here's why. We actually agree more than we don't when it comes to this stuff. 95% of all Americans actually agree to the kind of universal background checks that would have kept that lunatic from walking out of a Texas gun store armed to the teeth. Nearly 60% don't think that shooters in Las Vegas, in Newtown, in Texas, in Virginia, and so many other tragic sites ought to be able to have assault weapons we won't even issue to our law enforcement. Same goes for body armor or cop killer bullets. You believe they're legal? And other items unbelievably allowed in what's supposed to be a first world nation. Americans also overwhelmingly think people on terror watch lists, domestic abusers, and the mentally ill shouldn't legally be able to pack heat. Now, I know there's some who say, hey, let's just end it all. In Australia, after a mass shooting that shocked the nation, a mandate came down to have a countrywide gun buyback program. Most of our allies, by the way, they ban or restrict gun ownership with dramatic penalties for possession. And the gun fatalities, well, they're a fraction of what we have here. I'm not even asking for any of that. I just want some sanity and a sliver, just a tiny hint of it, of political courage to actually give the American public what we want. We don't agree on a lot of things. We actually agree here. Please, let's not use the pursuit of perfection to be the enemy of the good. I will take incremental progress any day over the daily drumbeat of carnage. When babies and the elderly are massacred alike during a Sunday Mass, and somehow we have almost reached a collective shrug, what have we become? For crying out loud, America, we are better than this. Or at least I hope we are. All right, coming up next, we will pivot to Election Day, less than 24 hours away. Polls, they open very shortly, and there are a whole lot of races to discuss. Most of them have one thing in common: Donald Trump, and whether or not he will hurt Republican incumbents or give a boost to Democrats.